Good evening, Anna Kavanagh here, live at 9, coming to you from Cooney's Hotel in Ballymahon. And I'm joined this evening by Louise Heavin, who is running alongside me here in Longford-Westmeath in General Election 2020 as a candidate for the Green Party. I had been hoping that the other three ladies that are running alongside us would be able to join us tonight, but they have sent their apologies. So Louise, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And I had the pleasure last year of having your company for part of the journey down the River Shannon when we made the series Taste the Pure Drop. And that was my first time to meet you, and I was really, really struck by your sincerity and your commitment to the environment and to Ireland's future. You were expecting your baby at that time.
I was, yeah. Thanks for inviting me here, Anna, and for setting this up. I'm happy to be here, and it's nice to speak to each other as people as well as candidates. You know. It was a really good series, that Taste the Pure Drop, and I was expecting my daughter at the time. She's now nearly 1, so it tells you how long ago it was. It was kind of, that was one of my first media things to do with the Green Party. Before then I was active in the party, but just organising events and things, but that was my first time to be on screen as a Green Party representative, and since then I've been elected to the council in Westmeath, and now we have running alongside yourself for a Dáil seat. So.
That's right, and isn't it lovely? We're running alongside each other, not running against each other, and to support each other, because both of us, I suppose, have expressed a deep desire to have a better future for our children. So. I've decided to run as an independent, and you've decided to run as a Green Party. Tell me, what was it brought you into the Green Party?
Yeah, well, after the last election, 2015, 16, was it 15, 16, yes. I was living in Dublin at the time, and my vote was still in Longford-Westmeath, and I happened to come home, and we actually had a funeral we went to, and it was my mum's great aunt who passed away, and she said, she's brought you all home to vote, because she was really political, you know.
Yes.
So the night before, my dad had all the election leaflets, and we went through them, and I decided who I'd vote for. I did some research online, and Green Party was who I decided to vote number 1, and glad to see a Green candidate. I'd voted Green Party in the UK when I was living there, and then 2, 3, and whatever, but the people who were elected, I felt, didn't represent me and didn't represent my situation and me personally and my views. And I kind of was a bit unhappy, and I was unhappy with the housing situation in Dublin. It was just starting. I was on a good wage and I couldn't afford decent accommodation, to rent. So I was despairing over that, and I was also despairing at the fact that in the Midlands, in Longford-Westmeath, the kind of recovery that I'd seen happen in Ireland and seen happen from the UK, I'd seen this kind of recovery happen and was going on in Dublin, didn't happen in the Midlands,
Yeah.
And I kind of felt, well, actually, compared to Dublin, I thought it was a much nicer place to live, the Midlands, and there's some great towns. We have great towns across the constituency, and I couldn't understand why there hasn't been the same recovery at home, why this kind of new kind of entrepreneurial spirit hasn't lifted up, small startups, this kind of tech culture hasn't kind of come in. Now, there has been a bit of that since, but I decided to get involved with a party that I believed in and try and bring something new, to the Midlands, and try and work building up a smaller party that I agreed with, and it was the Green Party. They're fundamentally concerned with community, with the environment, and with sustainability, and they're all things that through my work as an architect I have been concerned with, so I felt I'll join the Green Party, I'll try and support them, try and grow something, and I ended up being the candidate and running, and
yes.
But I'm really happy to, and I'm excited that I'm now a new voice in Westmeath County Council where there was never a Green councillor before, and we actually have 2, Green councillors. So I'm excited for that, and the fact that I'm getting a great response now that I am a candidate and I am running, and people are kind of happy to support me. So it's great,
And you want to build on that?
I do want to build on that, yeah. And I think the Green Party has an alternative approach to what's happening at the moment in housing and planning. Climate action, hasn't been happening, and the Green Party have good plans for that, and we spoke earlier about the crisis in farming. And again, that's something the Green Party are keen to kind of counteract, because we have to make changes because of what's happening to our climate. And we have to work with farmers, and farmers are ready for change and ready for something new and a different approach, so I'm excited, yeah.
Well, last night both of us took part in the IFA debate up in the Park Hotel in Mullingar, and I found it tough and I found it difficult, I have to say. There's no doubt about it, there is a crisis in farming. Now, and I'm from a farming background myself, with very, very close ties to the land. The Green Party are just not hitting it off with the farmers because of a number of statements that have been made by Eamon Ryan, your leader. He's talked about reducing the suckler herd. I don't know whether he was really serious about this or not, but he spoke about rewilding rural Ireland and maybe introducing wolves and that kind of thing. But I have to say that I felt that you got a very good reception last night from the farmers. They were really rooting for you. I felt that, at one stage you came under attack from somebody else who was running in the election, and they immediately sprung to your defence, and they were almost protective of you. You were telling me that you were canvassing earlier today in Granard. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was canvassing earlier in Granard, and like that, we were standing on the main street and deciding which direction to go in, and a tractor just kind of came by us and slowed down and stopped. And a farmer got out of it and, said, "Oh, I thought it was you canvassing," and he was there to just offer some words of support and say, "We're getting his support and we're doing great."
And that is lovely.
And that is lovely. And like that, I mean, I know Eamon Ryan might have said some things, and I guess I'm keen to get a more rural voice for the Green Party, in the Midlands. I'm from a farming background myself. I know how things are working in terms of the family farm, or not working as it happens.
Yes.
So I'm keen to have that voice, and I think we do have other rural voices. The issue has been that up until very recently, Pippa Hackett, has been elected to the Shannon, but before she was elected, we just had Dublin spokespeople because they were elected to the Dáil, Eamon and Catherine, and they do speak very well, and they are very knowledgeable on a variety of issues. But I think having Pippa Hackett, who's a suckler farmer herself, and she speaks on agriculture, and people who live in the Midlands and are from it, I think that's important, and we can relate then to the farmers and their situation. And a lot of it is also about listening, and understanding their concerns and where they're coming from, and the fears they might have about changing the way things are being done at the moment.
And of course, Saoirse McHugh over in the west of Ireland, I mean, it looked almost at one stage that she was going to be elected an MEP. She really did extremely well in that election, didn't she?
She did, yeah, she did brilliantly, yes. And she's just an example of kind of the fresh new voice that the Greens can have in places that seem very traditional in their voting patterns, or seem like they're very stuck in their ways, when really a lot of places, when you bring something new to them, they're ready to embrace it, I think,
Well, for me, I've decided to enter this election. I was coming at it from the point of view of a mother, and part of that generation of mothers for the first time, who will see our young people perhaps rent all their lives, not being able to buy their own house. When they do actually get employment, a lot of it is temporary. It's very insecure employment, very, very difficult starting off. Like we had a strike yesterday from the teachers, the members of the TUI, the young teachers, and I'm a retired teacher myself, but the young teachers starting off now that were recruited after 2011 came in on a much, much lower pay scale that had been newly created. So that in the last number of years, they would have, some of them would have lost out maybe up to €50,000 over colleagues that are teaching next door in the classroom that managed to get in there before that 2011 watershed. So yes, Deirdre, can you get water, please?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
I've got a bottle of water.
Oh, you have your bottle. So this is going out live, and I suppose that's the fantastic thing about a live Facebook. This is not Miriam O'Callaghan and what was the name of the other fella last night? Brian Dobson on Leaders Debate. This is live. And as I say, our children and grandchildren are the ones who will have to live through the worst consequences of climate change. And I think that for so long, two political parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, have dominated the political landscape in Ireland. They have brought us to where we are. And I really feel, listening to them for the last 3 weeks, churning out on the same old promises that they've promised. Every time there's an election, they promise the sun, the moon and the stars, and they don't deliver. I think people realise that now. So people are looking for change. And I just think that we have to imagine a whole new way of doing politics in this country. And this thing of people being pitted against each other and roaring at each other and shouting at each other and not listening to each other, I think we're going to have to dispense with that. And I suppose that was the idea I had, if we could have brought the 5 of us into the room and we could sit down as women. But as it happens, there's only the 2 of us, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And let me raise that issue of being a woman in politics. I listened to Ivan Yates this evening, and he's doing a rundown of every constituency. And he has predicted, and he actually prides himself, in being so predictable, being able to predict all of these results. He has said that it is going to be a 4-horse race in Longford. Boxamore, Peter Burke, Robert Troy and Joe Flaherty is going to be elected for Longford. So, no women. What do you think of that?
No women again.
Yes.
That would be very disappointing, I think. And the reality is, although I know most of those men, and I'm friendly with them, and they're they come from
nice
a good place.
Men. They're nice men. Yes, they are very nice men.
That is not the change I am running for.
Yes.
I guess that's it. And part of the issue was in the last election there was no woman elected in Longford-Westmeath, and certainly in terms of the recent referendum a couple of years ago, there was a group of us in Athlone and in Mullingar, and we were trying to get TDs on board to help us out with canvassing and with different things, but they were reluctant to come out and help, and I think because it was fundamentally a women's issue and it was about women's health at the time, and it was disappointing,
Yes.
Because again, we saw with the referendum a massive change came in, the same with marriage equality, a massive change came in, and that was brought about by the people, and it was just disappointing that some of our, but not all of our elected representatives got behind that,
Yeah. Well, my difficulty is that 1 in 4 women are victims of domestic or sexual violence. That is a shocking statistic. And TUSLA is the state agency that is responsible for domestic, sexual and gender-based violence under the 2013 Childcare Act. And as we know, TUSLA is a really, really toxic organisation. Funding for women's groups like Women's Aid, Safe Ireland, and that funding all comes through TUSLA. And the issue of domestic violence and sexual based violence has not actually come up at all in any of the political discussions in the mainstream media, either print media or broadcast media. And I think part of the reason why that has happened is because politics is really seen as a man's thing, isn't it?
It is, yeah. No, and you're right. And I'll tell you a funny story, Anna. I was in the Dáil with Alethea when she was only 3 weeks old.
That's your baby?
My baby, yeah. Yes. And we were invited up by Catherine Martin, who's deputy leader of the Green Party. She was presenting a bill to the Dáil on period poverty, So it was about women who in homeless shelters or in direct provision centres, or just women who don't have very much money, who can't afford products for their period, sanitary wear. And the bill was to bring them into homeless shelters, direct provision shelters, public libraries, public toilets, schools, universities, and to provide them free of charge, to kind of eradicate this. But it was amazing when she came to present the bill and stood up to start. Almost all the men got up and left.
They couldn't cope.
I don't know what it was, but they just got up and left the room. Now, apparently there was something important being said about Brexit, but this was also very important,
Yes.
But they didn't want to listen. Now, the bill, of course, passed and was going through until the Dáil fell. But still, the fact that there was very few in the chamber, because there's very few women, of course, in the Dáil compared to men, but they didn't stay and listen. And, it is a shocking statistic that 1 in 4 women suffer domestic abuse. Sorry, I was saying domestic abuse. And I think if we had more men, listening, if we had more women who were able to say these stories in the Dáil and more men listening, then we would get changes we need in all of these areas, Yeah.
Well, the reality is that roughly 50% of the electorate are women. So obviously when it comes to casting their vote, women are actually voting for men who are members of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. So maybe that may change on Saturday. We don't know. Now, I suppose people are suffering a lot from election fatigue. I know myself, I am as well, It has been going on now for 3.5 weeks. And they've just heard over and over and over and over again about what is wrong with the country. And I'm very, very disappointed that there has been very little said about how we can create a better future for us here in Ireland. Now, you mentioned what happened to you in Dublin, that you were in a good job and you actually couldn't afford the rent. And I've been saying throughout this campaign that Ireland reminds me of a boat. Almost half the population of Ireland lives in Dublin and the 3 surrounding counties, Meath, Kildare and Wicklow. And if everybody rushes to one side of a boat, it will capsize. And Ireland is in danger of capsizing. So you have all of that population in Dublin. It has driven up house prices, it has driven up rent prices, it has created congestion, it has made it very difficult to get children into schools, children to get into creches and so on. And then you go across then the Inny to the Midlands, the border counties and the West, and you literally have the towns and villages dying on their feet. Small family farms being wiped out because of the big large feedlots and the big dairy farms now, automated robotic dairies that are now emerging, milking up to 1,000 cows. So I'd like maybe just for a couple of minutes if we could tease out where we would like, what kind of Ireland would we like in 2030? Have you any ideas on that, Louise?
Well, I do have a few.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of part of the reason I'm we're running, I guess, they're getting involved. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there with the boat analogy. We don't have balanced development in the country. And what we are doing in Dublin and around Dublin, that donating effect of housing and new communities, is taking from our existing communities. And this is something I've been saying for some time now, that I think if you just take Longford-Westmeath, we have this fabric, I call it the fabric of small towns and good villages and places where it's actually brilliant to raise children to live.
Yes.
You have good schools, GA pitches, churches, shops, largely have like the kind of main ingredients for really good places to live. The trouble is we haven't been valuing those and we haven't been building on those, and what we have been doing is allowing this expansion of Dublin into these new suburbs where developers are building, from an architect's point of view, developers are building for profit, and they're not building communities. They're not building with these kind of facilities in mind, how to set up kind of a community atmosphere. And I think we should be using what we have in the Midlands a lot more. And, part of the problem is the road network and the transport infrastructure. And I think that's a key way to start to release this land. But on top of that, the way we're working, it's changing. We can work remotely now, and businesses can be able to have satellite offices places, but we haven't embraced that yet. So I think we should embrace that. We should be encouraging businesses to move or to help people, work from a village hub or a town, and help people to live back in town centres and back around communities, and set up community-led development and community-led housing schemes, so you're not relying on a developer to come in and build an estate with a big wall around it,
Yes.
in a place. You're building housing that supports what's already there, within walking distance of all the local amenities. And it's a green ethos, it's
Yes.
about sustainability,
Yes.
essentially. But it also improves quality of life for everybody, because again, you have that kind of community atmosphere that, like, my parents might have grown up with, or my grandparents would have grown up with, when it was safe to walk on the roads and when everybody did generally live and work in a similar area. So what I hope that happens in 10 years' time is that we've moved back towards our communities, and we have reinforced them, and we have brought life back into them, and we've made them healthier for people, and we've connected them, which I think is the key thing, connected them with good transport links, all our kind of Midlands towns, so that people don't have to get in their car and wait in traffic and everything.
And commute into Dublin.
Yeah.
And, of course, then central to all of that is the family farm. And what I've been saying is that for the last 40 years, really, we have been following a policy of globalisation and the creation of super cities. And I think we're going to have to go in the opposite direction. Instead of globalisation, localisation. That every community, where all the supports are already there, as you said, the GEA, the local hall, the local pub, the local school, that we really build on those communities. And it would be just so incredibly easy for the government to bring in legislation that would make it really advantageous for small businesses. I'm not talking about Google's being built down in Athlone or someplace like that. I'm talking about small indigenous local businesses that are producing goods, maybe the raw materials coming from the local farms, for example, food products, and small businesses that are sustainable. The other thing that we need to introduce is public banking. We have allowed a situation to arise in this country where we have 3 pillar banks. In actual fact, Seamus May from the Public Banking Forum of Ireland would say that we have a banking cartel in this country that monopolises money, so that we're paying up to 5 times the interest rates that they're paying on the continent, for example. So that if the local credit unions and post offices were allowed to provide cheap loans to small business, to small farmers, and to young people that are wanting to buy a home, it would be a fantastic way of reinvigorating rural Ireland, and we'd have a much better quality of life. And the other thing that I feel, there's a health crisis, but we have to look at why are so many people sick. And I know like it's part and parcel of life, but stress is the big killer. That's a known fact. But people are stressed out from having to get up early in the morning, face into a 2-hour commute with children in the back of the car to drop off at a creche, put in a day at work. The workplace has become a very, very stressful place nowadays. It's all about performance, performance, performance. I noticed that over the lifetime of my teaching career. Towards the end, it was all about performance, performance, performance. And people are stressed, they're becoming ill. And the way that we're mass producing our food now in big feedlots, where the cattle are fed indoors all the year round and meals and everything like that, the food that's being produced doesn't have the micronutrients that are needed for good health. So I suppose part of the way of solving our health crisis is to reduce the stress that people are having, and that people be able to eat nutritious food, drink pure, clean water that's not polluted, that they have time to work, rest and play. I think that would go a great way towards solving our health crisis. Like, I retired 18 months ago, touch wood. In 2019, I didn't attend the doctor at all. And that was the first time in years that I didn't have a visit to the doctor. And I put that down to the fact, I was working very hard as an activist, but I wasn't under stress. I was my own boss. There was no pressure. No pressure trying to rear children or whatever. So, as I say, if we could move away from the globalization model to localization, small communities producing their own food, being self-sufficient in food, people being able to work locally so that they don't have long commutes. And the other thing is this: I think every local community needs to be energy self-sufficient. So instead of these massive big wind farms that's feeding into the national grid to be exported to Britain, that we should have small micro windmills, micro generators, solar panels, biodigesters, that every local community produce their own energy and be self-sufficient. They're celebrating 800 years of St. Finian up in Clonard. I think it's 800 years, it could be 1,000 years. Actually, it could be 1,000 years. It's a significant anniversary of St. Finian up in Clonard, just the far side of Kinnegad. And back in those days, it was an international university where people came from all over Europe. It was the Dark Ages in Europe. They came from all over Europe to Clonard. And so you had a small town there, I don't know how many people, maybe 5,000, I'm not sure. But they were completely self-sufficient, and all the requirements were there. Now, we don't want to go back to candles and all that kind of thing. We have the technology. I think we need to use the best of what was in the past and in the past way of living, and kind of reshape it, remodel it, and use it going forward. And as you say, we need to revitalise the Midlands. So that's just, we're speaking the same language.
We are, yeah, and especially in terms of that kind of self-sufficiency, and it's something I've been talking about with my Green Party colleagues for some time now, and that kind of, community energy schemes is a key part of that, where people can actually buy into them and they can pay them back, and and it's locally produced energy, when you think the amount of buildings, let's say, along the main street here in Ballymahon, that could accommodate a row of photovoltaics that the community could get together and put up there and power the town from,
Yes. And
like that with the locally produced food, to have it produced locally brings back that connection with what we're eating and why we're eating it, and a lot of processed food now, or packaged food, and they go through so many different things and so many additives and so many ingredients on the back you can't understand. like when you come back to it and you get locally produced apples or, you know, meat from your local butcher, you kind of know where it's come from, and there's that traceability and there's that kind of heritage to it as well, because as you said, we were very good at this at one point, you know, and we used to be very sustainable. Even when I talk about, let's say, my grandparents' time, like, or my parents' time.
My time.
You're not that old.
I'm sorry, Louise. My time. But when I grew up in Meath in the 1960s, my mother went to the shop once a month. Everything we ate was produced at home. The milk, the bread, the meat, the vegetables, the potatoes, the eggs, the jam, the buns, the cakes. Everything was produced, the butter, I don't know if I mentioned that. Everything was produced at home. So she went shopping once a month to buy tea, which she bought in bulk. She bought an 8-stone bag of sugar, and then she used to buy 4-stone sacks of flour. So, yeah, shopping once a month. There was no such thing as waste. There was absolutely no plastics, or the newspaper was used to light the fire. Our fuel actually was timber from the land. So completely.
It's not that far away. Like, we don't have to go back that far to find it. And like you're saying, like, there's a great example of what can be done in County Clare. One of my party colleagues, Voting Garvey, worked on this idea of a community kitchen, and it's where local producers can come in, and there's a HSE grade kitchen there that they can use, or you know, it's up to food standards, so they can produce jams or whatever to sell, you know, and it's produced in the right atmosphere with the right equipment and everything, and they can sell it locally then, and or sell it to the supermarkets. I know SuperValue was stocking some of it. So there is things starting up, but it is referring back to the way things were in a certain sense as well, you know.
And now I don't want, believe me, I do not. I don't want to go back to those days. Believe me, because it was back-breaking work. I mean, when you come home from school in the evening, you could be sent out to weed, you know, the cabbage patch or something like that, or to weed the garden. I hated weeding. Or, you know, you were sent out into the field to pull ragweed. It was like, you know, it wasn't pleasant. I didn't really like it that much. Well, I liked the cooking and all of that. But, that is what I would love to see happen. But that is never, ever going to happen under Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. You know, unless they are really, really, really chastened in this election. On Saturday, and they get an awful hammering. The two main parties get an awful hammering. They are not going to listen. I think if they do get a hammering, I think they will pull in their horns and they will start to listen to the people on the ground. But up until now, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael have been serving big business. Make no mistake about it. Like, I'm just laughing to myself, Fianna Fáil. It's not that terribly long ago since the helicopters were flying into the Galway races. I mean, they were coming in, was it 1 every minute, private helicopters, all under Fianna Fáil, you know, that whole era that was driven by Bertie Ahern and the Galway tent and everything like that. That's only a decade ago, little more than a decade ago. And then, of course, Fine Gael have come in and they have literally sold off the family silver. The other two big issues for me is CETA, the trade deal with Canada. What are your views on that, Louise?
To be honest, Anna, I don't know a huge amount about CETA. So,
yes, I brought that up last night. That is going to come up for ratification in the next government. Well, they will try to ratify it. And inbuilt into CETA is this ICS, Investor Court System, which will allow multinational corporations sue future governments for loss of profits. So, for example, if they introduce progressive legislation on protecting the environment and it affects the profits of a multinational corporation, the government can actually be sued in this court outside of the country. And this ICS is inbuilt into other trade agreements like NAFTA. and it has led to governments being sued. For example, the Romanian government was sued by a Canadian mining company because they tried to halt gold mining in a very scenic, beautiful part of Romania that has World Heritage status. And that's before the courts at the minute. The Australian government was sued by Morris, the tobacco company, when they put a health warning on packets of cigarettes. Now, Morris lost that case, but it cost the Australian government millions of dollars to fight it. In Argentina, the government ended up having to pay millions in compensation to private water companies when they brought in a cap on the price of water, because water there is privatised, and so the government brought in a cap because there was water poverty. Now, speaking of water, what are your views on water charges?
Good question, Anna. Yeah, I mean, this came up when I was living in the UK, actually, the whole water charges issue. And, you know, people took to the streets in Ireland. And I remember at the time I was living in the UK and I was actually paying water charges, because that's the standard system over there. You pay for your water. And I remember thinking, this was crazy. Why are people protesting? You know, I was thinking, you know, the water charges, because it made me, you know, having been charged for the amount of water you use does make you think about how many showers you use, how many times you load the dishwasher, is it going to be full? You know, it does make you think about your consumption levels. It was only when talking to people back in Ireland, coming back, that I understood where the anger came from. And it wasn't that they were opposed to, well, people were opposed to water charges, but it wasn't, I don't think it was about the idea of, you know, a charge will make you think. It was more at the fact that it was a tax brought in on top of what they were already paying, where in fact water was already being paid for by general taxation. So I could understand people's anger, and I believe the USC charge had already come in at that point, so this was another tax on top of another tax which was already brought in as an emergency measure. So I think the way in which it was brought in was definitely completely wrong. You know, they weren't thinking about fairness in the tax system and looking at the structures. I do think that a charge for how much you use, this kind of idea that the polluter pays, is a good one, but like that, you don't want to leave people in water poverty either. So you need to be very careful. It's the same when we're talking about carbon tax, and like it was brought in the last budget. Well, it was there, but it was increased in the last budget, and nothing was done to counteract that. So you have a situation, and I certainly have come across it, where you have pensioners maybe, or people who are really on the breadline already, and then their bag of coal or their bale of briquettes goes up slightly, and it means that they actually have to put on the fire later in the day, and they have to suffer through the cold for an extra bit, you know. And I don't think that was considered properly either. You know, I don't agree with the way that was brought in, because you are, again, you're affecting the poorest in society, and that's not fair. You know,
it falls disproportionately. Getting back to the water charges, I think that people didn't have a problem with the water charges as much as the idea, and they knew that Irish water was set up in such a way that it was going to be privatised. Because water is actually the new gold. You know, fresh water is going to be very, very important as we go into the century with climate change and everything like that. And so people just knew that it was set up to privatise it. But then getting back to water charges, if you're on a minimum wage and you get a water bill for €100, we'd say, that is crippling, because you're bringing home less than €400 a week, and that's a quarter of your wages has gone on a water bill. Whereas if you are a rich person that's bringing home €800 or €900 a week, €100 is what you'd spend at the weekend for a meal for two with a bottle of wine thrown in. You know, that's the unfairness of it. And getting back to the carbon tax, those who have done the least to cause the problem, which is, as you say, the pensioner, who will be paying up to, if they go ahead with the current proposals that are suggested, there will be an additional €10 put on a bag of coal, which means that the old age pensioner is actually going to be frozen with the cold, whereas somebody that is rich with money will be able to retrofit their house and end up having one of these houses that is a passive house that you could nearly heat with a candle. Yeah. So, but it is the rich that have created the problem with their big cars and flying around the world and so on. And the aviation industry actually is not going. They're not going to impose a carbon tax on the aviation industry because they're saying it will affect tourism. Yet we heard last night at the meeting that there is a carbon tax on green diesel, which is going to have a crippling effect on agricultural contractors, which is going to have a knock-on effect then on farmers. They're going to have to pay a lot more to have their silage made and their farm work done. So, but do you know what? That all goes back then to the model of living that we've been talking about. Because if we go back to that local community model of living, producing our food locally on small farms, generating our energy, renewable energy locally, working locally, that's what's going to tackle climate change, not carbon taxes. We can have all the carbon taxes in the world and all it is going to do is drive people into poverty. It's not going to solve the problem because the rich will continue to do what they do, fly around the world and drive big cars. And then, of course, these data centres, there's a new data centre being built on the edge of Dublin City that is going to consume 5% of the entire electricity output of the country and drive up our carbon emissions,
Yeah, well, I think like that and like big business, as you said, they're the people who are polluting the most and should be charged as such. And the carbon taxes should be on them and the aviation industry and all that. But I think we need to be careful that if we're charging them, they're going to charge the consumer more, and that's where I think if you're introducing and rising carbon tax on certain things, well, our proposal, the Green Party proposal, is to give a dividend model. So back at the start of the year, everybody would get money back through the tax system or check social welfare system to allow for the increases throughout the year, which would the ERSI have modelled that, and it's a much fairer way of raising a carbon tax. But in raising a carbon tax and charging it on big businesses, you will be forcing them or getting them to look at doing things differently and offsetting their carbon or changing how they're doing it, and perhaps even in the car industry you might see the battery technology advance much quicker, so you're trying to incentivize the move away from carbon production, but you're not wanting to leave anybody behind either. And that's the most important thing. Like you said, the most important thing is we don't leave people behind and we don't make the poorest in our society who we're trying to take care of the worst off. We have to be absolutely careful on that. So yeah, I can understand that you don't agree with carbon taxes. They have worked elsewhere, but again, it's the way in which it's done. And like that, if you're not providing free retrofit schemes for people in fuel poverty or for people in social housing or whatever, then yes, of course, it's going to be incredibly, it's going to be like punishment for them than just adding €10 to their bag of coal.
Yeah, like we've known about climate change for the last 20 years. I wrote a book on it in 2008, Green Schools Meeting the Challenge of Climate Change. That's 12 years ago. That was at the height of the Celtic Tiger, where Fianna Fáil allowed developers to just throw up the houses any old way at all. Those houses are now 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. They are probably DE ratings.
Some of them C, but
so there was no effort being made back then, and it all has to do with profits. Everything in Ireland is driven by profit, to allow a small group make vast profits at the expense of the rest of us.
Well, on that point, actually, I think it's good to highlight that, because the developers are building for profit. Now, the new building regulations came in, and I'm working as an architect, so I'm kind of involved in that, and it is much better, but still the developers are trying to work for profit, so they're trying to push things all the time. And actually the model of housing we built in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, where we built public housing, we invested in quality building, making sure they could last the test of time, which is a very important thing, you know. And you know, many people are still living in these houses because they are, you know, very sturdy houses. And in some of the older schemes you see, and I've certainly seen it going out canvassing, there's nice communities built around them as well.
That's right, yes.
So there's building for the public good, and I think really you can't, some developers are good, but not all of them, and quite often they're building for profit and not considering the communities that they're creating. So I think more public housing is certainly part of the solution to that, you know. And it feeds into this idea of community and reinforcing our communities.
Yes, and I suppose there is a housing crisis. We're hearing about it all the time. There's a housing crisis in Ireland. But in actual fact, there are already enough houses in Ireland. There are enough houses. It is just a matter of bringing the people to the houses rather than building new houses. And I suppose I kind of want to wind things up now, because I'm conscious of the fact that at this stage people are kind of could be switching off. Fianna Fáil, I think are talking about building is 50,000 or 60,000 houses in the next few years, and there's people saying no, that's not going to be possible. And you're an architect, is it going to be possible to get enough houses built as quickly as they're saying that we need to build them to meet the demand? But it goes back to that super city model, doesn't it, where they're going to build them?
Yeah, exactly. Where are they going to build them, and what type of housing it's going to be? Now, there are always new technologies coming on board, and timber frame kits are becoming a lot smarter and things. But I think I don't want to make this negative, too negative, but the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, their model for delivering a lot of houses is putting more money to first-time buyers to buy new housing off developers, and that will increase supply, they are suggesting. But I don't think that is going to work, because really you're just raising the house prices. Will you raise them enough in Longford or in Granard for people to build there? Probably not, you know. Because they'll have to raise substantially. You're just increasing mortgage sizes for people who are already struggling to afford housing where they're living. I think giving that money instead to people who are buying older houses, let's say in town centres, in places where they can have that money to, like, often the older houses need repairs, they need maybe new roofs or new heating systems or whatever, and giving money to people buying those properties to do up, which will, you know, revitalise an area or a community.
What a brilliant idea. Like, I drove down James Street, myself and Deirdre actually drove down, we were going to Leinster House, and I think it was James Street I was driving down, and every second building was boarded up. Certainly when you go into Longford, so many boarded up buildings, empty shops, boarded up, and all the accommodation overhead just going to waste. So actually that is a brilliant idea. So Louise, it has been absolutely lovely speaking to you, having this conversation, which is the longest conversation we've ever had. And I think that we have set a trend in Ireland, that instead of going hell for leather at each other and tearing each other asunder, what we really need is an Ireland where politicians, or people who, we won't call them politicians, but people who are running for public office, learn to sit down and have a civilised discussion with each other. Because I've learned so much from talking to you tonight, and vice versa. And that is the model that the model of politics that I would like to see going forward, because I think that political discourse, political discourse in Ireland has become so ugly, And I've witnessed that firsthand now last week myself in a radio debate that I took part in. It was, well, the word I would use is disgusting, where people were trading insults at each other and shouting and roaring at each other. And it doesn't serve any purpose. And what I would really love to see is people sitting down, people who are running for public office and public office holders, sitting down and listening to each other. Because I think there is merit in what everybody has to say. And I'm a great believer of the adage, take what you want and leave the rest. So that's one thing. Second thing is, I think that we have set out our model, and we're very much singing on the same hymn sheet.
We are, yeah.
You know, very much where we would like to see Ireland in 2030. You know, people living in local communities, eating lovely, nutritious, locally produced food, energy sufficient, you know, good community spirit. If you have a good community spirit, young people are growing up in a loving, caring community, so it reduces crime rates, it reduces antisocial behaviour, it sorts out the health crisis to a huge extent, and of course we could bring in homeopathy and all of that kind of thing and alternative medicines. When you have local communities, then people are there for each other. So we look after the elderly, we look after people when they're sick, we look after people when they're bereaved, because people in large cities are alienated from their neighbours. They don't know who their neighbours are. Like a few years ago, when I live out in Legan, in 2014, I broke my leg. How the local people looked after me was absolutely amazing. Like I had people that I didn't really know that terribly well, just to say hello to at Mass on a Sunday, coming up to the house with pots of stew and food, and neighbours bringing the children to school, and I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
And actually, I had booked somebody to come in and paint my house, and of course I couldn't do anything move. And the neighbours all came in, they moved everything, the whole place got done up, they did all the cleaning for me. Oh my God, I was spoiled. That is what happens in a community. Then a couple of weeks ago, a Polish family who have come to live among us, their house burned down, and over 100 people turned out in the GAA centre in Legan, I think it was last Saturday night week, to raise money for this family. You know, and that's what happens in a small, close-knit community, and that is replicated right across the villages and towns in the Midlands that we know, Balnacarrigy and Keena and Raharney and Rathwire and Matcher Bridge and Turles Pass, you know, all those little villages and towns that have so much to offer, and we need to build on that going forward.
We do.
So, that's it. I want to thank you so much for watching. I'm actually very energised by our conversation.
Me too.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed the conversation that myself and Louise had. And I think when you go out to vote on Saturday, I would really appeal to you to think not just of yourself, but to think of the Ireland that has been created for your children and your grandchildren. You know, use your vote for them, for what really serves them best. And I'm sorry to say this, there are really, really good, decent men in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and I know them here in Longford-Westmeath. But Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil as a party has brought our country to where it is at the moment, bedeviled by so many different crises. And a vote for them is a vote for more of the same. We do know that they will probably form the next government again. But if they get a good wake-up call, a really, really good wake-up call, I think they will be more chastened going forward. They will listen to people. They will actually listen more to what people on the ground are saying to them, and they will be less arrogant. So I will be back to you tomorrow for my last live at noon, and I just want to thank you so much for watching. So I want to thank you for your support over the last 3.5 2.5 weeks. It has been a very positive experience. How about yourself?
Yeah, I've loved it, especially going around meeting people.
Yeah.
You know, I've absolutely
Yeah.
loved it. Tiring, but
Tiring.
good.
And I would say the same. And this is not a pious platitude. I have to say that I would do it all again. It has been a very, very positive experience. I've really, really enjoyed it. There's fantastic people living across the Midlands in Longford-Westmeath. And I suppose myself and Louise, we would love to be able to represent you in the next stall.
Yeah.
So consider us on Saturday, and vote 1, 2, 3 in order of your preference. But it is important that you go out and vote, and it's important that you vote right down along the line, because it's the preference votes that actually get you.
They make the difference. They do.
They're the ones that make the difference. So I want to say a very, very special thanks to Deirdre, who is behind the camera. And without her, I wouldn't have been able to put together this wonderful production tonight, because you generally know me sitting in the car with a shaky phone in my hand, and that. So, would you like to come out and then? Yes, we'll introduce Deirdre.
The funny thing is, I'm just going to set the camera up there. The funny thing is,
you can't be heard, Deirdre.
Yeah, give me that, and yeah, that's me. The funny thing is that a lot of this is actually running off battery, and I don't know if you've noticed, it's gotten quite dark. So you're getting quite dark, so we're going to have to wrap it up.
Okay, so a big thank you to Deirdre, who has. A big thank you to Deirdre, who has made this production possible tonight. I think it's kind of a first, because a lot of people are saying to me, you know, how RTE, for example, is handling the debates and the coverage and the newspapers. And I think for the first time, social media is beginning to make its mark on this election. So it's exciting times ahead.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it is groundbreaking tonight, groundbreaking that we're doing this on social media, on Facebook, live on Facebook, and it's groundbreaking that we're running alongside each other, not against each other. So the very best of luck to you on Saturday, Louise.
Thank you.
And it has been a pleasure to chat to you. Okay.